Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this event by the Community of Practice on Tech-Facilitated Violence by SVRI. We are super excited about today's topic, and we're not the only ones. We had an incredible amount of interest in people signing up, so we expect a large crowd today, and that's exciting. And that's in no and that's definitely in no small measure to one, the topic is something that everyone's been talking about and thinking about. It's something that we all care deeply about. How do we define intimacy and consent and harm in digital spaces? But also because we have an amazing lineup of panelists who will join us today to share their perspectives from, what does it look like to moderate from the platform perspective, but also from a legal perspective, what does it mean to define it? And then obviously from the practice and the experience of people on platforms and survivors, what does it mean to be safe by design, but also to respond in a survivor-centric way, culturally appropriate way. So of course we have an amazing range of perspectives and insights, and we're super excited for it. This is the second event of the year for the COP. The first one was on measurement and ethical research. That's a topic that our first working group is working on, and we also had a really great panel and a lot of interest. You can see that online. We'll have two more events this year, and the last event of the year we're thinking about it for early December. It's probably going to be a latest evidence from the field of TFGBV, kind of rounding up some of the best experiences and learnings from the SVRI forum. So you can plan up for that. Besides the events that we have planned for this year, we are super excited about two working groups that we are leading this year, and that's kind of new. This year we haven't had working groups in the past, but they've been working really wonderfully. So I just wanted to thank everybody who's a part of those and who has been super engaged. We are excited about the outputs that are shaping up. In the measurement and ethical research working group, we're considering we're putting together a digital research toolkit that's going to support organizations doing research in this space, and also a resource and network mapping tool to help the community coordinate better, exchange research and evidence, but also get to know each other, who's working on what, where. So that's going to be super exciting. And on the policy and the measurement working group is led by Francia Baltasar. And the second working group, the policy and advocacy working group, is led by Barsha, who's also our moderator today. And is incredibly relevant, the work they're doing to the conversation today. They're putting together two policy briefs, one on intimacy is not nudity, and the other one on safety by design, which of course, both of which inform today's panel. So we could not have a better moderator than our own Barsha here to lead us through today's conversation. So yeah, I mean, without further ado, just last thing to say, if you are not actively working, if you want to actively participate in the review of outputs by the working groups, please email the facilitators. If you're a part of our monthly updates, we always share their emails and how to get engaged. But you don't have to be a part of the working group to participate. We'll be sharing activities that you can do as well to review outputs, give us your insights, etc. So stay tuned to the monthly updates where we will share more about those and how to participate. And now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Barsha, who's going to lead us through this amazing panel.
Thank you so much, Ale. So it's a very interesting day because the kind of work we are doing and this very interesting panel with some amazing expert. And thank you all for joining us today for this conversation on defining intimacy, consent, and harm in the digital age. We are here because digital technologies have fundamentally changed how we look at the concept of intimacy, as it is created, shared, and too often violated. And as they have changed, our legal systems, our platforms, our policymakers have been left grappling with a question that sounds simple, but clearly it is not. And the question is, what does meaningful consent actually look like in online spaces? So today's conversation sits within our broader community of practice, as Ale already explained, and it brings together four amazing experts working across law, digital rights, platform governance, and survivor advocacy, and each looking at the questions from different vantage point. At the heart of this issue, there are some real tensions. One of the tension is between protection and freedom of expression, and the other tension is between justice and the practical enforcement. And when intimate content is shared without consent or shared beyond the boundaries it was originally intended to, it causes real and lasting harms. So there's a very recent study which was done by Chen, which actually very interestingly portrays that any image can become a weapon once it is in the wrong hands. So, if be it a nude image or it's an ordinary non-sexualized image, when an image is shared without consent, the harm moves far beyond the survivors into the families, communities, and every part of women's life. So clearly, it is not very simple to categorize any such images as the only nude images are intimate images. So it's important that we move beyond that. And when we look at the tension between the whole the prevention model, when we look at like the tension between how the laws are defined on paper and how the laws are implemented, there again we see there's a lot of gap, and the tool we access to prevent that harm, such as content moderation, legal restriction, platform takedowns, also carries their own risks. If it's drawn too broadly, they can silence legitimate expression and disproportionately restrict marginalized communities, or push people out of the digital spaces where they have actually found their communities and freedom. So laws can define what consent means, where the lines are, but defining a violation again on paper is very different from enforcing it in practice, and especially when content crosses platforms, jurisdictions, borders in seconds, and increasingly when the content is AI generated or synthetic, it becomes even more problem. So over next 45-50 minutes, our speaker will help us unpack these tensions from different angles. So I just like to welcome Dr. Olga Marquez. She's an associate professor of criminology and justice at Ontario Tech University. We have Rohini Lakshane. She's an independent researcher, technologist, and Wikimedian. Kenya Fairley, she's associate director of safety partnerships at Bumble, and Hira Basit, program manager at Cyber Harassment Helpline at Digital Rights Foundation in Pakistan. But as we begin, I would actually like to invite you to hold this question in mind. When intimacy moves beyond its intended boundaries online, what exactly is broken according to you? And what would it take to build systems, laws, and platforms that actually repairs it? Also, feel free to ask your questions. Use the chat room. Please put your questions and we will get back to you. So to start with, like to our first speaker, I'll start with Olga. I actually wanted to start with like, since you're a criminologist and you have been looking at like consent and privacy in different legal framework, what do you feel like, how do legal frameworks define consent and privacy, and where do they draw the line between privacy violation and exercises of expression? So what is your opinion about it?
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. I think it's a huge, huge question. And so I'm going to try to do a little bit of it justice in the small amount of time that I have here. But I think one of the difficulties that we have is that the law has to take these concepts that are relational, contextual, and constantly changing. So these concepts that you had mentioned, consent, privacy, harm, even freedom of expression, and turn them into legal categories that can be defined, proven, and adjudicated, right? So this is what the law has to do. And sometimes this works reasonably well. Sometimes it doesn't. And as someone who's studied and has published in and taught in sexual violence work, we know that many times we're talking about sexual harm, the law doesn't actually work that well. I'm situated in Canada, so I'll give some examples here. So in Canada, for example, the law does make an important distinction between different layers of consent. So under Section 162(1) of the Criminal Code of Canada, it is an offense to knowingly distribute, transmit, make available, or otherwise share an intimate image when the person depicted in that image did not consent to that sharing or distribution, or where someone was reckless about whether that consent existed. And I think that this distinction is really important because consent to one thing does not mean consent to everything that follows. Someone might consent to take an intimate image, someone might consent to sharing that intimate image with a particular person. For various different reasons, but that does not mean that they consented to that image being retained forever or shown to someone else or uploaded to a platform or copied or circulated to an entirely new audience. So at least Canadian law does make this distinction between those layers of consent. In general, I think we mostly understand this principle of the different layers of consent and how it doesn't apply in relation to sexual conduct as a whole. So consent to one sexual act does not mean a blanket consent to another sexual act. So for another example, right, consent to, just as an example here to illustrate, consent to sex with a condom is not consent to sex without a condom. So at least in Canada, stealthing, that act of unknowingly removing the condom is illegal. So the law recognizes this also here in my context. But I think that we still struggle to apply that same understanding when sexual conduct and technology become intertwined. And of course, these questions are also shaped by much older patterns of regulating women and girls' sexuality and their conduct and their behavior, where those who create or share images are often blamed for their own victimization, told that they're kind of they put it out there, quote unquote. They're subjected to slut shaming rather than having that violation of their consent taken seriously. And we see this here in our court cases as well. I'm certain there's examples across globally. So in my own research with frontline professionals responding to non-consensual intimate image dissemination, I employ this idea of the digital layer, this idea that technology can compound and extend an original act of harm, of sexual harm. I also extend the idea of permanent remembering to describe the fact that digital images can be stored, copied, circulated, and potentially resurfaced years later. So this complicates kind of this idea of harm, of consent, right? Technology complicates this because so now there's this additional layer of harm and there's also this additional layer of remembering and remembrance, right? This image is always going to be there, or these images or these videos. So for me, when we're kind of thinking about this, one of the questions that's most important when thinking through the intersection of technology and the digital age and law is the question of harm and where does harm end? So the way the law works is that it has to identify a particular act. Okay, so in this case, someone distributed an image, or someone recorded another person, someone published something. And so that's what the law does, right? It has to, and when you go to court, right, and when you think about court cases, they're identifying particular acts. This is what the law has to adjudicate, what has been done or not done. But the experience of harm is not so neatly discrete, right? People don't experience harm in this sort of way, like this one single discrete act. So an image can continue to exist and create uncertainty long after that original act of distribution. You may not know who has it, where it has gone, whether it's been copied, or whether it's going to suddenly reappear years later. And so in my research, that's what a lot of frontline professionals were talking about, right? So we can work on, and this image has been circulated, but we really don't know how to act or legally how to kind of respond to the fact that this is there's this permanent remembering. We don't know what's going to happen, who has it, who's copied it, where it's housed. And right, we don't know those things. Privacy also raises similar concerns. People sometimes assume that once another person has seen something or once you voluntarily shared something, you have somehow surrendered all privacy. But also Canadian law has recognized that privacy is contextual. So an example of this is the Supreme Court of Canada made this very clear in a case RV Jarvis. This was adjudicated in 2019. In that case, a teacher secretly recorded female students using a pen camera, and particularly focused on female students. The students were visible to others. They were in hallways, they were in classrooms, and this went all the way up to our Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court rejected that this idea of simply being visible in a public place meant that they had no reasonable expectation of privacy, right? And there's other things that were involved in here, but this kind of helped us understand that just because you're in a public place, for instance, that we just kind of have no expectation of privacy there. And so I think this also gives us a useful legal principle, right? Being seen is not the same thing as being consented or as consenting to being recorded. And being recorded is also not the same thing as consenting to that being distributed. But even with these legal protections, there's also limitations. Again, as I said before, the law doesn't neatly map onto what people experience as harm or harmful. Something that may feel profoundly violating, humiliating, sexually harmful to the person experiencing it may not be what sort of the law is dealing with, right? So the legal question may instead become, does this fit within a particular definition, right? Does this fit within the definitions that we have, the legal rules that we have, the case laws that we have? Is this technically an intimate image? Was there reasonable expectation of privacy? Can we prove who distributed it? Can we prove knowledge or recklessness? And I don't think this is also, again, to complicate this further, as simple as privacy on one side and freedom of expression on the other side. Because the challenge right now that I see that legal systems are trying to do is figuring out how to protect people from non-consensual sexual harm and intimate harm, digital harm, without treating every form of communication or expression as harmful, right? So there's, again, this tension that we're kind of grappling with, right? How to protect people, but also not to envelop every single type of communication and defining that as all inherently harmful. So in Canada, what we're seeing now working through, like we have some bills, there's proposed amendments dealing with sexually explicit deepfakes. And the bills that are going through are explicitly recognizing that restricting the distribution of deepfakes engages freedom of expression under our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but also arguing that restricting, right, making these restrictions nonetheless might be justified because of the harms caused. So we're seeing these questions being dealt with and these tensions being dealt with in the legal sphere. The more difficult questions I think to think about legally is what is the nature of those expressions, what is being done to another person through these expressions, whose autonomy is implicated, and does our legal definition of harm actually capture what that person is experiencing? Again, through law, harm is very sort of discrete, concrete. Here's this particular act. Another complication, and I'm going to say, and I see this as well, is how sex education or sex positive or sexual health content is getting caught up in these crossroads. Not all images, as you were saying, Barsha, are intimate images. Not all nudity is intimate. For instance, right? Not all of them are sexual. Not all of them are sexually harmful. And so we're seeing, right, things that are created for and by to us LGBTQ communities being caught up in these crossroads, sexual health education being caught up in these crossroads, images of breast cancer survivors being caught up in these crossroads, right? So how to navigate, again, these ideas, these complicated concepts of what is intimate, what is harm, right? And how these intersect with technologies, with platforms, and what the law can do about this, right? Because sometimes images can be used for education, awareness, advocacy. And so I think that's where the challenge lies. I don't have a concrete answer here. I just think there is a lot of complicated questions that need to be answered. There are multiple layers to it. Also, as I said, the law really wants kind of these really kind of concrete definitions of intimacy, of harm, of consent, etc. And sometimes these people's experiences don't lay so neatly with kind of what the law asks us, right? So the law needs boundaries and definitions, but digital sexual harm doesn't always stay within these boundaries and definitions. And this is where the challenge we're seeing with, particularly lawmakers are seeing with, how do we contend with all of these?
Thank you very much, Olga. And that made me think that, in Global South, a lot of countries where we don't have like very specific laws or acts dealing with TFGV specifically, I think that my next question to Rohini is like, if you can talk more about like, how are we looking at these laws? How are we looking at these practices? And when it comes to platform governance, the platform policies, they go beyond the existing laws of the country. So, what has been your experience? In what situations have you encountered where intimacy and consent that genuinely become difficult to define in practice? Because a lot of times, law, as you rightly said, law would categorically define, but will it that able to decide on the context? Will that able to decide on the capture the context, which is very important in case of both? Rohini, what do you think about it?
So when there is a certain social or cultural or religious context bounded to the imagery, say someone wearing a swimsuit or consuming alcohol or just appearing to be consuming alcohol, or not wearing clothing or accessories that they are expected to wear according to the religion they pursue. So those are the kind of cases where there is no nudity or sexual explicitness involved, but it's still a quote unquote intimate image. Now, that kind of image-based abuse, when it's intentional, as in when it was posted without getting consent, is difficult to design. It's difficult to define by design, by intent. So the intent is often voyeurism. It is to discredit or shame or defame the victim while flying under the radar of the platforms or the law. And if it does get caught, it gives the abuser plausible deniability, because sometimes the image by itself may not be problematic, but there is background audio appended to it, or there is text juxtaposed with it, or there are accompanying visuals that change the meaning, that recast the meaning of the image. And of course, there is synthetic, there's alteration that has become much easier, much more accessible and cheaper because of the availability of AI tools. Now, all this also means that the imagery is likely to stay in circulation longer. So there are platforms, including porn sites, including subscription services on various apps like Telegram, that charge a subscription for some of this voyeuristic imagery. It need not always be sexual or nude. And the fact that it remains in circulation longer means that whoever's distributing them, gets to benefit of them longer. And every time the image travels, it lands in a new digital location, because that is the nature of this imagery. It is distributed far and wide and quite rapidly. It travels without the social info originally bounded to it. So there is, an economy of harm around it, and it is difficult to define, it is difficult to catch, because that is the intent. That is how it's made. Because if it were straight up nude, it would get taken down very fast, quite often by automated tools, sometimes even before it's uploaded or as has had a chance. So this is intended to fly under the radar of the very systems that are intended to catch it. So on the side of the platform, something like this would need investment into trust and safety, investment into trust, capacity and knowledge building for trust and safety, and content moderation in different languages and geographies and cultural context.
Thank you, Rohini. And I think it's a very good segue to come to Kenya to talk about how do you see how do you basically operationalize consent in a structure of in the architecture of the platform, and what have been your experience and how have you have been doing it? And since you do have like a lot of experience working directly with the survivors, so it'd be very interesting to know from you that how your platform is looking at the design to incorporate consent in the design itself.
So thank you so much. If we can go to the next slide. I appreciate being on the call today and engaging in this conversation, because a lot of what has already been discussed are definitely things that we think about at Bumble, and things that are constant conversations between our operations team, between our safety and integrity policies, our safety legal team as well, who advise us on content takedowns, regulatory concerns, and ensuring that we remain in compliance and things like that. So I'm going to talk about a couple of specific things as we move through this next part of the conversation. I'll try to be brief so that we can get to everyone on the panel. So first of all, I focus on our safety partnerships, and I work across all three of our products within the Bumble Inc. suite of apps. So we have Bumble Date, which is our most well-known, I would say, dating platform. We also have Badoo, which is another dating platform that we have, and they are a little bit different in terms of the vibe, the tone, and the texture of those two platforms. And then we also have Bumble for Friends, or BFF, which is for finding those platonic connections and relationships. So back in 2014, when our founder and CEO, Whitney Wolfe Herd, when she founded Bumble, it was specifically to introduce a new approach into dating that gave women more agency and control over the ways in which they initiated dating and carried out their dating journey. So our entire history and our safety by design is really rooted very deeply in women's experiences and wanting to make sure that we can push back against unwanted contact, harassment, and taking into deep consideration the harm that women may experience on platforms. So I work across all of our platforms to engage experts that work across industry, experts that engage in gender-based violence, NGOs, charities, researchers, and other organizations that really help inform the work that we're doing across all of our products. So going to the next slide, I want to say a bit about how we approach member safety. So we really think about this from the perspective of prevention, where we want to make sure that we can keep bad actors from accessing the platform. We also want to make sure that we're able to mitigate any harm that our members may be exposed to by quickly removing harmful content, promoting a safe environment and respectful environment, and also making sure that when things do go wrong, that we can respond empathetically and responsibly with our human moderators that are working across our platforms. And then in addition to that, we're also wanting to make sure that we are promoting those pro-social behaviors and healthy interactions that we want to see on the platform. Now, we do that both for things that are happening on the platform, and we also work in terms of broader advocacy, for example, to change and influence some of the laws that were spoken about earlier in the call around cyber flashing, for example. We've done a great deal of work in that space to make sure that across the broader, not just online safety ecosystem, but within society and the context within which women live and build out their dating journey and seek to make other connections, that we're also promoting the types of behaviors that we want to see. Now, specifically on our platform, I think one thing that differentiates us at Bumble is that we take a very gendered and nuanced approach to the types of offenses that we would consider to be harmful and prohibited on our platform. So, for example, we, of course, take a hard look at any type of stalking, physical abuse, harassment, but then we also look at misogynistic abuse that may be taking place on the platform. So we're also looking at cyber flashing and prevention of such things, non-consensual intimate image abuse. We're thinking about unwanted sexual contact, sexual comments, body shaming, fetishization. All of these things that disproportionately impact women are some of the types of behaviors and content that we don't allow to exist or continue to exist on our platform. So as we go to the next slide, we have over time, we've sought to introduce a number of safety features that help us to address these things. Certainly, we always want to encourage that our members are reporting anything that makes them feel uncomfortable or weird. But what I'm going to talk about right now is our safety feature with Private Detector. So hopefully we'll have time to come back to this a little bit later in the conversation, and I can talk about some of our other features. But right now, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk very specifically about the work that we've done with Private Detector. So with Private Detector, this is our technology that automatically detects and blurs lewd, sexually graphic images that someone may be trying to send. So in a one-to-one chat, if someone is trying to send a lewd image, and this has been trained on male genitalia specifically. So in 2018, when we first started to develop this technology, it was really focused on the issue of, I'll say, dick pics, unfortunately, because what had happened is it became so common and it started to feel as if this was a normal type of interaction that women just had to deal with for being online, let alone being on a dating app, but just being on any type of messaging platform, that dick pics were just going to be the normal calls, normal kind of course of action and engagement. So we wanted to make sure that we could put the agency and control back into the hands of our members, specifically with the focus on women, so that if they didn't want to see those types of images, they didn't have to. So our system automatically detects that type of lewd imagery. It automatically blurs it. And when it goes out to the person, they will get a notification basically saying this image is sensitive and may be inappropriate. And so the person can decide not to see it, and they can immediately report that person. And then we'll take action against the account for the person that sent it. Or in the context of the conversation, they may have decided that they want to see that type of imagery. They can unblur the image and continue the conversation. So when we think about consent, and when we think about sexual harassment. So when we first did this back in 2018, we also expanded our sexual harassment policy because we wanted to make sure that we're moderating and adjudicating reports based on consent, ensuring that there's digital consent, and that any imagery shared or any sexually explicit conversations are happening within the context of the conversation. So, for example, if someone is sending this type of lewd imagery on the first message or immediately after saying hello, where's the opportunity for the other person to have consent in receiving that imagery or engaging in conversations that are sexually explicit? So we try to really train our moderators, our human moderators, on understanding that when they're reviewing these reports, that they're looking for context and consent so that that person is agreeing to have these types of conversations. We are a dating app. We do expect that there will be conversations about intimacy, but we also want to make sure that people can do that within a time frame in which they feel comfortable and within a context for when they feel comfortable. So by deploying our Private Detector technology, that removes a degree of exposure to harmful content for our members where they may not have consented to it. Now, if they've consented to it, great, that's fantastic. But if they have not, then automatically they don't have to see that kind of imagery if they don't want to. And then the other thing I'll say here, two last things, and I'll pass it on to someone else, is that we have made this technology open source on GitHub. So it is available for other platforms to take and to use. We've made that available, and it's about 98% accuracy without any trade-off. So it's very precise. It works extremely well. And when you go onto GitHub to look at the code, there's also a white paper and other information that's available there. And so when we think about how Private Detector works and why we feel it's important, it works in two ways. So one is the user level mitigation so that the individual is able to manage the content in their own way. So they have the agency and the control to do that. And then the second way is through platform level enforcement. So we are able, as the platform, we are able to help support making sure that our members are not exposed to this type of imagery if they're not interested in it, if they haven't consented to it, and making sure that it still stays within our community guidelines. So I'll be able to talk a little bit later about some other types of tools that we have put in place, but I'll pass it back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Kenya. I'll move to Hyra. Hyra, you are dealing with the survivors, the most important stakeholder in this whole discussion, in this whole issue. What has been your experience? How did you come across like the kind of harms different communities deals with? Are they monolith? Are they different? Are how is it, and how many cases you have seen where it's explicit, sexually explicit, or cases where it's sexually non-explicit, but it's still considered as intimate for the survivor?
Hi, Brisha. Thank you. So I think, I'm currently leading the digital security helpline that Digital Rights Foundation. We're based in Pakistan, but we get cases from all across the world. This helpline has been running for the past 10, this is its 10th year now. It will be in December. And so what we've come across through our experience, not just working with survivor victims, but also with social media and tech companies and law enforcement and policymakers, is that social platforms and even the current law that we have here in Pakistan, it restricts the definition of image-based abuse or intimate imagery to there's a very narrow definition, which means either there's some sort of nudity or there is sexually explicit actions, either alone or with another person. But that is not our experience working with survivor victims across for so many years, and not just and it's not necessarily restricted just to Pakistan. Like I said, we get cases from all over the world, and this is an experience that I've heard from women and girls, not just from Pakistan, not just from South Asia, not necessarily even from the global South, what you would traditionally consider to be more conservative societies. This is our experience from across the board, basically. We have seen examples where of cases where there's a group of colleagues, for example, and the group has been edited out, so a woman and a man are standing next to each other, and so they're presented in a different context. That is also a form of intimate image abuse from the perspective of that particular survivor victim. We've also had examples where a normal everyday image of a woman or a young girl there's a suggestive emoji placed on top of her face or near her face, something like, for example, an eggplant, or maybe the smiley face with the tongue out. Then we've also seen examples, and I think Rohini mentioned this before, where it's a completely normal image of a girl or a group of girls, but there's like a vulgar or a suggestive song playing behind it. And immediately they're just like, well, no. And I think what we've been advocating for when we're talking to policymakers and with social media platforms is that, and what's important to understand here, is that when they see these specific types of images, whether with sound or videos or just, static images, the fear that they have and the consequences that they fear from those images being shared or put online or publicly is the same as another person would fear if it was just a nude or sexually, or if it would a real image of them engaging in a sexual act. So, and this is not to diminish the very real, not just consequences, but the very real experience of having your real intimate imagery being exposed to the world. Even if it's just a third person, it doesn't even have to be like a group of people. If it's just one third party, the consequences that they assume for themselves, or the consequences that they fear, is pretty much on the same level. And so, which is why we have to advocate constantly with policymakers and social media platforms. And we did have some success with that, particularly with Meta. And so, because of our advocacy, because we collected a lot of data at the helpline, we constantly sent them example upon example and survivor quotes and their recollections. They agreed that for this particular issue, they needed to introduce a specific policy. So they introduced the sensitive imagery policy based off our data and our helpline reports and all of our advocacy work that we did with them. This is also what we recently, there was an oversight board case where it was an AI generated image of a woman. And this is exactly what we were getting the board to examine the case from the perspective of that it doesn't matter whether it's AI generated or real image. It doesn't matter you're asking from Meta's perspective, they were unsure whether the image who looked similar, the AI, because it was an AI generated image, there was a likeness to the real person. So it doesn't matter because the image is similar enough to the real person that was meant to be targeted. And it doesn't have to be the same exact face. Just because that likeness is there, another person who is going to view that image is going to say, well, yes, it's not the same exact person, but I know who they're targeting. And that is enough to say that, harm that person's reputation, whether professional or in their personal lives. And in some contexts, and you have to assume that consent is not there if a third person is publishing that image. And if they are reporting it, well, some people, especially in Pakistan or many other conservative societies, there's a lot of women who don't even have access to devices and internet, but they could still be targets or victims of TFGBV or image-based abuse. How do you expect them to go online and report an image of themselves that they might not even see? They don't even know that it's posted there. So you can't assume that just because a person is not reporting their image, that consent is there. And there's also a lot of like fringe or gray areas because we've been doing a lot of we're producing research right now on AI generated or synthetic image abuse here in Pakistan particularly. And we've seen examples where there's a prominent, very senior woman, a politician, and there's AI generated videos of her doing somersaults, but then her shirt or a trouser will just very slightly just lift off. You can see just the tiniest bit of skin. Or, she lands onto a charpai or like a traditional bed, but a male politician is standing beside her. So it's not very obviously sexually explicit or intimate imagery, but you get enough of a hint where it is very likely to harm. This is a public person, of course, a public-facing role. But if it was just an average woman, it would be enough to harm her reputation, either professional or personal life. And we've had cases where I remember this one particular case where a brother was telling his sister, because she shared the voice note with us, and the brother was telling her that I know that this isn't real. I know this isn't a real picture of you, but if this gets out, I'm not going to say what he threatened because, trigger warning. But, people know that sometimes it doesn't matter if an image is real or not, but, the consequences can be pretty much the same.
Thank you so much, Ira, for highlighting such very important points. I'll just, because we don't have a lot of time, so I'll just quickly move to the second round of questions, and I'll start with Olga. How do you look at like this whole cross-border transnational nature of AI generated content or intimate imageries, and especially from the perspective of law and how law is dealing or failing or how it's working on that? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think a lot of what Rohini and even Hira were talking about really feed into this question, right? And I was looking at some of the Q&As and people were asking this because different countries, different jurisdictions, they have different laws, right? We might have here in Canada maybe more concrete legal definitions around consent. In other countries, I think someone wrote in the comments or in the Q&As that Indonesia doesn't have concrete definition of what is consent, right? So this whole idea of crossing borders is very important and very, very interesting and complex thing to deal with. I'm just as an outside example, in teaching in my classes, I often talk about sex trafficking. Not sex trafficking, but sex tourism, and why people move from Canada and other Western countries, United States, UK, go to other countries where the laws are not the same, right? To sexual violence, to perpetrate sexual violence, right? So borders is a really very important conversation to have here and to intersect here. So I think AI generated and cross-border image-based abuse exposes, as I said, this really fundamental problem. Laws, again, every country has their own context, right? But they're largely developed around ideas of identifiable actors, identifiable acts, territorial jurisdiction. Again, culture context and what is kind of appropriate in one culture and another culture, as well as relatively clear distinctions between what is real and what is fabricated. And digital technologies disrupt all of these assumptions, right? So let's think about borders. So if someone in Canada creates or uploads an image, an intimate image, the platform is headquartered in another country, its servers are located somewhere else, the image is downloaded, copied, and redistributed by people across multiple jurisdictions. Where exactly did the harm occur, right? And this goes back to what I was talking about before. Like, how does law define harm? It's such a hard thing to define. And even as Kyra was stating, how do we even define intimate? What even is intimate? And when we think about cross-culturally, when we think about cross borders. So which country has jurisdiction over the person who created that image in the first place? Which legal system owns the platform? And even if a Canadian court can make an order, how do you enforce that order against an actor or company operating somewhere else? We had this case against Meta, I believe, right? And there was an intimate image posted, and there was a case coming out of British Columbia, and the court's like, the intimate image has to be taken off the internet. Well, no, sorry, it's not Meta, it was X. And X, right, was just like, oh, we'll take it off servers in Canada, but we're not taking it off servers in other countries. You can't tell other countries what to do, right? And so we've had this conversation in Canada as well, based on that court case. So this is one of the fundamental difficulties regulating digital harm. The harm is transnational, but most legal systems are primarily national, and then even in nations, territorial or state-based. And this creates practical problems as well as legal ones. Even when a person can establish that a crime or civil wrong occurred, identifying the person responsible, obtaining evidence across borders, securing cooperation across platforms, and removing content transnationally is extraordinarily difficult. And not even to forget that, as I said before, removing the content itself doesn't mean that the harm is over, right? And that goes back to what I talked about before, the digital layer and permanent remembering. You can remove the image from one website. That doesn't mean that it hasn't been copied or downloaded or stored or redistributed somewhere. I think as other panelists were saying, right, there's, different websites where you can post all sorts of images. So there's a mismatch between the way the law often imagines resolutions, right? Identifying the violation, removing material, prosecuting the person, right? And the technological reality that digital content proliferates beyond the original context and beyond any one jurisdiction. AI and synthetic imagery also adds a different layer of complexity, right? Because again, they force us to question what is harm and also what is intimate. So as Hyra was talking about, right? Let's say someone takes a publicly available photograph of a woman and uses AI to create a realistic sexually explicit image of her. She did not consent to that AI image being created. She did not consent to that being depicted sexually. But depending on the legal framework, the traditional laws governing intimate images, many laws still focus around kind of an actual image, right? Or an actual recording, not sort of something that's fabricated, right? Again, as I said before, we're kind of teetering on this freedom of expression. And so we're seeing some efforts in some countries to expand legal definitions, but we also have to be very careful not to assume that simply expanding legal definitions is going to solve a problem. Because again, going back to what is the definition? What is harm? What is intimate? Is the harm that someone believes that the image is real? Is it reputational damage? Is it sexual humiliation? Is it the loss of control over one's likeness? Is it the knowledge that your face or body can be digitally sexualized without your participation or knowledge? I mean, that is all harm, right? That is all harm. But how can the law take those things into account, right? When those are they're not realized, material or practical, tangible harms, right? Also, whose experiences of harm will be taken seriously? And I think this is where intersectionality is important, and this goes off all the other panelists' topics. The consequences of a sexually explicit deepfake, for instance, are not equally distributed, right? Think about women whose religious or cultural practices of modesty make non-consensual sexualization particularly significant. Again, we've been having these conversations. I know many of my students have this conversation with me as well. What do deepfakes mean when I dress this way with intention and an image can be made of me, right? And precisely what Hyra was speaking about. I think about people who are already racialized, marginalized, publicly visible, or vulnerable to sexual stigma. How about people who live in countries that heavily criminalize sexual conduct and where punishments can incur, right, over a deepfake, right? So these are very very important and practical implications of the limitations of law, right? And how legal frameworks have to be designed contextually, but also how legal frameworks have to think about the differential impacts of harm, right, to women, in particular to sexual minorities, right? The technology might be new, but the inequalities shaping whose sexuality is judged, shamed, or taken seriously, that is not new, right? And that's an important aspect to remember. Are current laws equipped to deal with this? No, not no, not as they stand now. They're not. We're seeing legal frameworks trying to respond, but technology moves way faster than any legislation. This is another problem, right? Legislation is slow, right? It takes a
Grappling with
long
the
time,
movement, yes.
right? So it's slow. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, right?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll just move to Rohini, and we don't have a lot of time, so just like be very brief. If you can talk about like the unintended consequence of a stringent strategy on online, legally or platform wise, do you think that that kind of impacts at all, like it's in terms of like the freedom or like finding communities online, especially for women and girls and people from marginalized communities?
So in the interest of time, I'll keep this very, very brief. So I'll skip things like, scope creep, where sexual health information or breastfeeding images or queer art or documentation, for example, gets censored. Some things that don't get talked about much are that evidence can disappear. So immediate removal is often necessary, but some victims or survivors also need a secure record for a police complaint or a civil remedy or whatever other remedy is possible. And when it gets very stringent, sometimes that evidence disappears. Some consent enforcement systems create additional risks, including surveillance risks like mandatory identity checks, age verification, face matching, and so on. The third thing is like as you mentioned, queer people or trans people or women and girls in sex work or restrictive households. Some of them, their only available avenue is online space. Sex workers and adult creators can lose income and safety tools. Survivors may lose support networks. So that is another consequence that gets talked about relatively less than the others. And of course, there is the overall civil liberties consequence, where people are then driven to self-censor, close their accounts, or avoid online interactions and withdraw from public spaces, which is a self-feeding cycle, because the more certain demographics disappear from the online space, the worse it gets for those who are remaining.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll move to Kenya. Can you talk about, like, you have already explained about like the private detection and how are you ensuring consent on the platform. What are the other safety features? Yes, you want to talk about it, and we do have like really 5 minutes left. And we have Hanga also.
Yes, no, I know. I will go. These next few things are going to be fairly quick. So I just wanted to say a little bit about deception detector, review before send, and our help hub. And this actually addresses, I made a couple of notes from some of the questions that were coming up. So if we go ahead to the next slide. So there was some question around online romance scams. So one thing that we have implemented is our deception detector tooling, which automatically detects spam, scam, and fake profiles so that we can remove them and prevent them from accessing the platform before our members are exposed to them. So that's one thing that we do. We know that for a lot of our members and anyone using dating apps, one of the biggest concerns is member authenticity, and that you're speaking to the person who is who they say they are. So we've invested in making sure that we have this technology to help prevent people from being on the platform who are not who they say they are, in addition to having ID verification as well, which is implemented along with using a government issue ID. So in the next slide, we're going to touch on review before send. So this is, oh, and I'm so sorry. There's automation, but it looks like it's not coming up, so you can see how it works. But basically with review before send, this is technology that we have in place that helps detect explicit, inappropriate messages in text that would go against our community guidelines. So this is intended to help address misogynistic messages that may be coming through, or messages that are extremely harmful, again, keeping women's experiences in mind. And so we have found that when the message is typed in, our system detects it using a series of, training that we've done with it, as well as keywords, key phrases, and things like that. It will prevent the sender from sending the message and give them the opportunity to change the message so that they're not using harmful language or words. And then if they do that, they can still send the message through. If not, it will just prevent them from sending the message. So that's our review before send. And we have found that about 40% of people choose to change their message after getting that alert that it is not going to go through. So in the next slide, our help hub is now what's great about this is, and you can see a little bit here, what it looks like in the actual in the app, is that for us, we wanted to make sure that our members could quickly and easily access helping resources, safety supports, that they also can understand where their report is in the process. So through this, they can make the report, they can see when we've accepted the report, when we're investigating and have made a decision. And we can also make a referral out to our Bloom program, which is our online trauma support program for members who've experienced sexual violence, physical abuse, intimate image abuse. And our Bloom program offers healing resources as well as paid one-to-one therapy in very serious cases. But what's great about our Help Hub, we recognize that one, in order for people to really build those meaningful relationships online, they need to feel safe. They need to feel that they can be vulnerable and be within a respected community. So a lot of our safety features that I've talked about help us create that environment and create the conditions for members to be vulnerable. But then also, if they do need to report anything that has happened or that they feel uncomfortable, we've made the reporting and access to helping resources low barrier, transparent, and easy for members to get help, because we also offer access to crisis referral services in the members' country of location. They can also then drill down to a specific state and area, as well as within the language of their choice. So I think if we go to the next slide, we can wrap up there, because I believe we might have one more speaker, or we just need to wrap up. So I'll just stop there, but you can see here the crisis referral service that we also have available. And then I'm happy to answer any other questions. I'm sorry, last thing I'll say, we are working right now on providing survivor support resources for members who do experience romance fraud on our platform, because we do find that oftentimes the actual harm does not occur on our platform. It's the introduction and the initial relationship building that happens, and then it moves very quickly to another messaging platform where over time that harm does occur. So when members come back and report to us that that has happened, we are providing survivor specific resources and online peer support for those members who have that experience. And I'll just stop right there.
Thank you so much. And with the permission of like the attendees, I'll just take like 5 more minutes. We're almost running out of the time. But my last question to Hira, what does a trauma-informed, survivor-informed mechanism looks like to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing that we need to think about is just speaking directly to survivors and victims. You cannot think of policies or how to act for their betterment without actually speaking to them. And that's something that we do consistently at the helpline. Even at the helpline, we are sort of deriving from what they're asking us, right? So we haven't actually done any research in the last few years. We did one a couple of years ago, but in the more recent times, we haven't done something which directly asked them, well, what would help you? Currently, we're just deriving from what we hear every day. Well, we get about like 25 to 30 calls a day. And so, or new cases, I mean. And so we're just deriving from what they want. And I think from our experience, what they prioritize is the quick and immediate removal of images, of intimate imagery or sexualized imagery. And so whenever we give them options, do you want to pursue legal action, or do you want just these images removed right now. What do you need right now is they prefer short-term, immediate removal of those images. But you cannot disconnect that from legal action as well, because there's no, even if you get those images removed right now, which we can do at the helpline, sure, but we tell our beneficiaries that this is no guarantee that this won't happen to you again in the future, in a few months, in a couple of years, because the perpetrator or your abuser, or most likely he, has those images stored in his devices. Or by now, because those images have been posted online or shared with a third party, now somebody else has access who can then, share them forward. And a lot of times what we also see is that other people might share them, or there's like cross-platform posting. And so I think this was mentioned before earlier as well, that some people then tend to financially benefit by sharing those images. There's, a click to download, and then, every download gets them earnings. So first of all, just speak to survivors about what they need. And I know this might be Pakistan specific, but this, I think from our experience also, this is very much relevant to other regions of the world as well. People do not have access or easy access to approach law enforcement, either because they will get victim blamed, or because they do not have the financial independence to sometimes even leave outside their homes without permission from their family members, often the male family member, father or brother, or sometimes they don't have financial independence to just walk outside their home. In Pakistan, what a major problem that we face is we only have 15 cybercrime wings in all of Pakistan. And so there's no guarantee that there's going to be a cybercrime wing in your particular city. So you might actually have to travel to a different city, which might be anywhere between 1 to 4 or 5 hours away. So a young girl who's 18, 16, even 25, who doesn't work, who needs money, I mean, how can she just up and leave her house to file a complaint? So you need more accessibility, you need more access to justice. I will quickly also say that stopncii.org or takeitdown.netmeg is an excellent initiative, and that's something that we definitely need from the side of technology and platforms. But right now, I mean, even though it's an excellent initiative, there aren't as many partners need. Even though a lot of platforms have signed up to be partners with them, there could be a lot more platforms who could actively be working alongside them. There are also platforms where one of the experiences from survivors is that it's just too confusing to actually go and report on platforms, whether it's, X or TikTok or Meta, it doesn't matter. It's too complicated because those options are hidden behind more and more options. And then you're confused. Wait, should I report this under adult sexual exploitation or bullying and harassment, or where should this go under? And so, it gets very confusing. Again, for someone who's not that digitally literate, it gets, okay, but and then there's another form, and then there's another form. Okay, well, they just gave me 5 forms to fill out. Which one should I go for? And now I have to submit ID. Well, okay, well, what? So for someone in villages in Pakistan or even like India, for example, not every woman even has access to ID, So that's something that we have also been trying to advocate for platforms. And I have a lot more to say, but I'll end it right there.
I'm really sorry. I think a complicated issue like that at least need 2 hours to discuss. Thank you so much, because it was very interesting to listen to all of you. I think we understood the issue very well from very different perspectives, but might not have a lot of answers. How law is defining, how the survivor experience is so different, how platforms are looking at this very differently, and combining everything together, and how democratic civil rights works, bringing everything together and making like a robust system. I think it will take us some more time, more discussion. Thank you so much for being there. Sorry we could not take all the questions, but yeah, over to Ale.
No, only to thank everybody, both our panelists who have been fascinating, and obviously it's a very complicated topic that we wish we had actually 1 hour to listen to each of you. But also to the audience for being so engaged. Your questions have been phenomenal. We will keep track of them. And 2 options are to do a part 2 of this event and answer some questions, or to see with our panelists if we are able to get you some sort of answers and post them on the website. So we'll take a look at options and share with everybody. But I do think that this is a starter of a conversation. There's incredible interest and so much more to talk about. So thank you again, everybody. This has been a phenomenal event, and thank you, Abarsha, for fantastic facilitation. Hope everyone has a lovely day
Thank
or
you.
night if you are in Australia like me.
Or India.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.